Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the basics of flight. Make sure that you all have something to write with. Some of the stuff covered in this you may be tested on in one of your aerospace books, particularly Module 1. So if any of you guys need that test, make sure you guys take some detailed notes. Maybe this will help you a little bit. Basically, we're just going to go over how an airplane flies, what the forces acting upon an airplane are, how it works, and that sort of thing. All right. Before we get started, I do want to announce our honor cadets for the month of February. The honor airman for the month of February is Cadet Calhoun. The honor NCO for the month of February is Cadet Connor Schrock. And the honor officer for the month of February is Cadet Captain Lordson. So congratulations to all of you. Thank you for your hard work during the month of February. So we're going to go ahead and get started, like I said, with the basics of flight. So hopefully you all have something to write with. I'm going to just go ahead and jump right into it. So Bernoulli's principle, we need to kind of understand what this is, what it states. You can see here Bernoulli's principle states that an increase in the speed of a fluid occurs simultaneously with a decrease in static pressure or a decrease in the fluid's potential energy. Simply put, fluid moving faster creates a lower pressure, and slower moving fluid has a higher pressure. When people hear the word fluid, they typically think of liquids like water. However, gases like air are also fluids. So Bernoulli's principle pertains to air as well. And Bernoulli's principle explains how an airplanes fly. We can see this with the shape of a wing. If we look at it, look at this graph here, you can see that it's kind of curved, and it's kind of curved on the top, and it's more flat on the bottom. And you see the L on the top and the H on the bottom. This is for low pressure and high pressure. Well, if you remember what Bernoulli's principle states, fast moving air creates a lower pressure area. Okay, so air has to travel over the top of the wing faster to meet the air going under the wing, and this creates a low pressure on the top and a higher pressure on the bottom, and the high pressure wants to actually meet the lower pressure, and this is what creates an airplane's lift. That's how a wing works. Okay, so you kind of need to understand what Bernoulli's principle is and how it relates to lower pressure and higher pressure in order to kind of understand how that works. I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds to just take a look at this graph, maybe write it down if you want. Okay, we're going to move on into the four forces of flight. So you see here, you got lift, and it counteracts gravity, and thrust counteracts drag. There we go. We just learned about how the wing produces lift. So we know that the wing produces lift to counteract the drag, but what creates thrust? Anybody know what creates thrust? And I can't look at the chat right now, unfortunately. So if anybody wants to speak up and tell me what produces thrust. Anybody at all? The engines produce the power to create thrust, and your thrust counteracts your drag. Now, what creates drag? A lot of things. So creating lift even creates drag. That's what's known as induced drag. The best way to describe drag, and this is in your aerospace books as well, is to imagine walking waist deep in a swimming pool. Now imagine trying to walk faster. The drag of the water on your body makes it difficult. That's because your body is a mass trying to move through, let's say in this instance, water. The water is creating drag. So that's very similar to how drag acts on an airplane. So pretty much everything can create drag. There's several different types of drag, but I'm not going to go into those. There's such thing called skin friction drag, which is basically like, particles on the airplane's skin, and that creates a form of drag. There's interference drag, which is where the angles, let's say like a 90-degree angle, like where the wing meets the fuselage, that area where it meets, that creates drag. There's all kinds of things that creates drag. I recommend that you can look into it, and so you can understand it better. Okay, we're going to get into the axes of an airplane. Now, there are 3 axes of the airplane, and you can see them all here in this diagram. You have the lateral axis, which is from wingtip to wingtip. If you stuck a rod from one wingtip through all the way through the wing to the other end to the other wingtip, that would be your lateral axis. And if you were to rotate the airplane around this axis, around that pole, that would be controlling your pitch. Now, you have your longitudinal axis. That if you stuck the rod from the propeller from the front of the airplane all the way to the tail, that would be your longitudinal axis, and the airplane moves around this axis by rolling. Then you have your vertical axis. If you were to stick the pole from the top of the airplane and go, all the way through to the bottom of the airplane, that would be your vertical axis, and the airplane moves around this axis by yaw. So an airplane can move in only 3 directions. Well, how do you control the airplane to move in those directions? Does anybody have any ideas? What controls the airplane to actually perform those maneuvers? And if anybody says anything in chat, I'll need somebody to actually speak up, because I can't see it right now.
Are you looking for a specific answer or a more general term?
Whatever you think. What makes the airplane move around those axes? What
Off
makes
the
it?
top. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Off the top of my head, I would think the stick. I think that.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's what it's called. Yeah, that.
Yeah. So that actually controls 2 of the axes, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So let's take a look at this diagram. Notice where these arrows are pointing to and what they're labeled. We'll start at the top and move our way towards the bottom. So we have the rudder, we have the elevator, and you have your flaps and your ailerons. Flaps don't actually make you move around a specific axis. We'll get into flaps briefly in a little bit, but the control surfaces is what these are called. The rudder, the elevator, and the aileron, these are control surfaces. These are what make the airplane move around those axes. And then we're going to get into which control surface does what here in a little bit. So we're going to start with the rudder. Okay, so notice the arrows on the left. You'll see the rudder. Okay, you can see there's 2 parts to the tail of the airplane. The part that the arrow is pointing to is the rudder itself. This part moves to the left and right, and is controlled by the rudder pedals, which, if you look on the right, you see the arrow. Down by where your feet would be, those are the rudder pedals. And if any of you are still confused, if you look at the left picture, and you can see kind of the crack. If you see the whole tail, and there's kind of a crack going down, and it kind of jags around. That part, the part that's aft of that crack, that is your rudder itself. Before that is just the tail. So the rudder itself is that back piece where that arrow is pointing to, and like I said, that piece itself is controlled by the rudder pedals, which your feet actually control. If you want your nose to yaw to the right, then you push the right pedal, and it's the same thing for the left. Um, so there you go. So your rudder controls your yaw. It controls whether your nose moves to the right or it moves to the left. Now, why would you need to have rudder pedals? Some of you may think that the airplane just flies straight and you don't need to use your rudder pedals. Well, not not quite true. We'll get into that in a little bit, and I'll explain why you need rudder pedals. And like I said, this control surface controls the yaw movement around the vertical axis. We're going to go ahead and dive into your elevators now. This controls the airplane's pitch around the lateral axis. On the left, you can see the moving piece that is labeled elevator, and that obviously is the elevator itself. It moves up and down when you move the yoke, which is what you see on the right, what the guy is holding with his left hand. So when you push the yoke up or down, you move the elevator up or down. Now, it's hard to tell from this picture, but if you look really close, you can see the shape of the stabilizer, that part in front. And it looks a lot like that of a wing that we saw earlier on in this presentation, except it's it's upside down. It's very hard to tell. But if you looked at a real airplane and looked at its stabilizer, you could easily see that it's like if you looked on a Cessna, looked at its stabilizer, you could see that it's the shape of a wing. It's just upside down. Why do you guys think why do you think it's designed that way?
To counterbalance the forward weight in the plane, sir?
Yeah, yeah. So basically that's it. So this is it's to balance the airplane, and it creates a downward lift, which keeps the tail from lifting. Since your normal wings, your big wings, are already creating lift, you don't want your tail to create lift because then your tail is just going to rise and you're going to be at a nose down attitude. It's actually upside down to counteract that and keep the plane balanced. Okay. So who can tell me what this piece of the airplane is? It's kind of tricky from this picture, but can anybody tell me? Okay, this is your aileron, and on the far right side, you can notice another piece of the wing. That's your flap. That's on the very far right edge, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So if you look at a wing, there's two pieces that actually move, and the one on the inside is your flap, and the one on the outside are your ailerons. The ailerons work almost the same way an elevator works. They move up and down, and they're also controlled by the yoke. When you turn the yoke to the right, your right aileron goes up, and when you turn your yoke to the left, your left aileron goes up. And ailerons are differential, meaning when one goes up, the other goes down. And that's actually very important. So when you want to turn, you turn the yoke, and let's say we're turning to the right. So you turn the yoke to the right, and your left aileron goes down, and your right aileron goes up. When your left aileron goes down, you create more lift on that side. And when your right aileron goes up, you're creating a downward lift on that side. Therefore, your plane actually banks to the right. So when one wing has more lift than the other, the wing with more lift goes up, and the wing with less lift goes down. And that's how you bank. So like I said, so if the aileron goes down, in this case it'll be the left aileron, it catches more air and increases its angle of attack, which lifts the wing up. And that's what actually it's what banks your airplane to the right, and you create a horizontal component of lift, which pulls your airplane to the right. That's how an airplane turns. We're going to watch a quick video on the control surfaces just so you guys can see them in action. It's just through a video game, like a simulator, but it's still pretty informative. So let's go ahead and watch that. So you could see all of the control surfaces actually working and see what they do. I thought that was a pretty neat video that you all could kind of see it in action and how the airplane responds to all of those. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the flaps. And now your flaps, notice the parts of the wings that come down and extend, those are flaps. When flaps are extended, the wing area is actually dramatically increased, and so is the angle of attack of the airplane. And if any of you are confused, the angle of attack is the angle of the chord line in relation to the relative wind. So if you drew a line straight through the middle of the wing, and then let's imagine that your plane is flying straight through the air. You're straight and level, and there's a line going straight through straight through the wing. The wind coming at your face is your relative wind, and if the angle is the same, then you're straight and level. But if the angle starts to increase, that's your angle of attack. That angle between the middle of your wing and the wind coming at you, that's your angle of attack. So when flaps are extended, the wing area is increased and the angle of attack of the airplane is increased, and so therefore the lift is increased. Pretty much most of the time, if you have a greater angle of attack, your lift will increase. So this allows for the airplane to fly slower without stalling and allow the airplane to descend at a steeper rate. Why would it be helpful for an airplane to descend steeper? Any takers? No? Okay, so this is helpful for landing with an obstacle that is before the runway. Imagine that there's a huge tree, like a 50-foot tall tree before the runway, and you have to get over that tree and land safely. Well, that's when you would use your flaps. They allow for a steeper descent. You're coming more straight down rather than at a glide. So that's what flaps they're used for. They help you increase the steepness of your descent, and they actually slow the airplane down, and they create more lift. And so by creating more lift, you can actually fly the airplane at a slower speed without stalling the airplane. I fly a 150, a Cessna 150. It's a tiny 2-seat aircraft. And normally our stall speed would maybe be somewhere around, if we hit around 50 or 45, that's when we start getting like a little, yeah, it's probably about to stall soon-ish. When we have flaps, I've gotten it as low as 35 miles an hour. So it allows you to fly at a slower speed without stalling. And that's also very helpful for landing when you want to be as slow as possible before hitting the ground and to make it more smooth. So flaps are primarily used for landing, but they can also be used for takeoff. Like I said, they increase your lift. So if you're wanting to fly, if you're wanting to take off on a short field, like a short runway, then you could use flaps and it would actually help you get off the ground sooner. Okay, we're going to go into some left turning tendencies here. Excuse me. So left turning tendencies. This is the last thing we'll cover in this class. There are 4 left turning tendencies acting on an airplane typically. So we're going to move from the top left. We're going to go across, then top or bottom left, and then go back to the bottom right. So there's torque, and it uses. Think about one of Newton's laws of motion. I can't remember which one. I think it's the 3rd law. But every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The airplanes in the United States, at least, their propellers turn to the right. Therefore, the nose of the airplane actually wants to yaw, wants to turn to the left. So that's one left turning tendency that you'll have. The second one, if you see on the top right, is actually called spiraling slipstream. It's caused by the wind from the propeller wrapping around the airplane. It actually loops and hugs the airplane, and then it hits the left side of the tail. You see where it says force there. It hits the tail, the left side of the tail, and actually moves the airplane's nose to the left. The third one, if you see on the bottom left, it's called gyroscopic precession. Precession means that a force applied to a gyroscope is manifested 90 degrees ahead in the direction of rotation. The physics of this is extremely difficult to explain, and I don't even understand it fully. I've heard that gyroscopic precession is actually a right-turning tendency in a tricycle gear aircraft, which is what CAP flies, like Cessnas. Those are tricycle gear aircraft. But it's a left-turning tendency in a tail dragger. I don't fully understand gyroscopic precession. It seems like you need to have a college degree in this stuff to understand it. I've looked at books. I tried to understand it. I just don't get it. So just know it's there. The last one at the bottom right is it's called asymmetrical thrust, otherwise known as P factor. If you were to look at a propeller, it is shaped very similar to a wing. And that's how it creates its thrust. I don't have a picture in here of a propeller, but that's how it creates its thrust. It catches air and it pulls. A greater angle of attack results in greater lift, right? So in a climb, the descending blade, which would be the blade moving down to the right, in American-made planes, has a higher angle of attack, which means it creates more lift, and that yaws the aircraft to the left. P factor is especially noticeable at high power settings with a high nose altitude. Most left-turning tendencies are at their greatest when at high power settings, low airspeed, and a high angle of attack. When you do, if any of you are looking to get, your private pilot's license, when you have to kind of do some stalls. You have to do some slow flight. Those are when you're at a high angle of attack, you're at high power settings, and you're at low airspeed. You will notice you will have to use a lot of right rudder. So that's why you have rudder pedals, is because of your left turning tendencies. When you are flying, you have to actually hold right rudder because of all the left turning tendencies that are acting upon the airplane. Let me see if I can go back to this. So it may be a little bit hard to see, but on the cockpit here, you can see right above the yoke, there's what appears to be a, I guess an airplane. Whoops, my bad. There's an airplane. Let me see if I can show you guys my mouse or something here. Okay. Can you guys see my mouse where it's moving?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
Yes, sir, a little.
So right where my mouse is, this is your your turn coordinator. So you'll see there's a notch here and a notch here on either side, and that just shows if your wings are level with that, you're at level flight, bank-wise. And then there's notches below that on either side, and that just shows you you're at a certain degree of bank. Right here below that in the white, and there's a little black ball on the inside. That is your, I'm trying to figure out what that's called. It's called something funky. But this actually shows you what your yaw is like and what you need to do to, I guess, what's the term I'm looking for? To, I guess, balance yourself, center yourself yaw-wise, I guess. So if your ball is to the far right, it means that your nose is actually too far left of center. The phrase is step on the ball. So if the ball is to the right, then you are going to step on your right rudder, and then the ball will come back to the left. And if your ball is too far to the left, you step on the left rudder and it'll come back to the right. It works. It's like the same bubble that's in a level. If you've used a level, you turn the level, the little bubble inside moves. It works the same way, and that's how it reads it. So that's pretty cool. You'll in the video that I showed you guys, he mentioned how the rudder is actually linked to the nose wheel, and that's something I thought was actually probably a good thing to bring up to you guys. Kind of a cool fact. The airplane, when you're turning on the ground, when you're wanting to taxi, you actually use your rudder pedals to steer. And then when he said differential braking, let me see if I can pull up the rudder pedals now. Each rudder pedal or each wheel has its own brake, obviously, with the exception of the nose gear wheel. The main gear have their own brakes, and you can control each brake separately. How you brake is you actually push the tops of those rudder pedals. If you wanted to turn hard, you would push just on the top of the right rudder pedal, and it actually brakes on the right wheel and allows the left wheel to kind of swing around. That's how aircraft can pivot so tightly. So that's just a cool fact that I thought I'd bring up to you guys. Any questions you have for me? I can answer questions about flight, about getting your license, any aviation related question. I can try to answer for you.
Sir, with the four forces of left turning tendencies, can you go back to that slide? I still need to finish up my notes on that.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
No problem. Anybody else have any question?
I have one, sir. How long does your pilot license stay?
You need to. It doesn't necessarily expire. You need to do a biannual flight review. So every 2 years, you need to get with a certified FAA examiner and take a flight review. And from what I've heard, it doesn't take a whole lot of time to actually do that. It's not really hard. They just are making sure that you're still proficient, you still know how an airplane works, and you still know how to fly it and sort of thing. So every 2 years, you need to kind of, I guess, renew it. But other than that, there's not a whole lot.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
Buckner asked, what are the best extra classes to do for getting your pilot's license?
That's a great question, actually. I'm going to, I was going to actually bring that up to you guys at the end. Right now, if you go to our squadron's Facebook page, and if your parents have a Facebook and you don't, then ask your parents to check it out. Captain Howard just recently shared a link of a free online ground school that's happening on Facebook 3 times a week. It's on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I believe. Completely free. Usually ground schools are around $500 or more, I think. And it's completely free, and it's online. It's readily accessible. You just log on. If you have internet, you're able to get on there. Like I said, it's completely free. I highly recommend that. I will, like I said, if you don't have a Facebook, ask your parents. If your parents don't have a Facebook, then I don't think you can view it. I think it's only on Facebook. I might be wrong about that. If I'm wrong, somebody can correct me, but I think it's only on Facebook. So if you have Facebook, check it out. Like I said, the link was posted on our squadron's Facebook. Another thing I recommend for your written test is if you go to sporties.com and you go to their pilot shop, and then on the top left, there will be a training section, a training tab, and you go to FAA Knowledge Test Prep. You can actually take some practice tests. You can go over questions completely for free, as many as you want. That's what I did, and I got a pretty good score on my written exam. A lot of the questions there are actually the same questions that will be on your written exam. So I highly recommend doing that as well if you want to learn, about basic aerodynamics, some flight planning things, that sort of thing. So yeah, Sporties, and do that online ground school. I think that would be very beneficial to you.
Aiden Cook asked where that was.
Where what was? The online ground school?
Practice test.
The practice test was at sporties.com. Let me see if I can pull that up for you guys, actually. So you'll go to sporties.com. Can you all still see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So you go to sporties.com and you'll click Shop Now. And the link for that is actually sporties.com/pilot shop. And you'll go to here to training. Go to FAA Knowledge Test Prep. Go to private. You'll start out as a private pilot. You're not going to start with getting your instrument. That's for a later time. So you're going to go with private, access now. Like I said, it's completely free. You don't need to pay or even have an account. So here you have two options. You can study test questions, or you can do FAA practice tests where it's actually timed and they don't give you your answers until after you complete the test. We're going to go over like FAA study questions. You can study by a specific category. If we click next, then you get different categories. You can select categories within those categories. Even if you're struggling with a category, you can kind of hammer that out. Or if you go back, you can do random questions. And once you click next, you can select anywhere from 200 to one question. It's completely up to you. Start session. Oh, look at that. The left turning tendency of an airplane caused by P factor is the result. Anybody tell me A, B, or C? A, B, or C? Anybody else? Nobody.
Sir, at least for me, you're still on your PowerPoint. So.
Am I still in the PowerPoint for anybody?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, well, okay. Let me see if I can fix that.
I could see your screen, but I could only see your PowerPoint screen.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Let me see if I can get that fixed for you guys. Whoa. Here you go. Can you guys see it now?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
You
Yes,
can
sir.
see that I'm
Yes,
on Sporties.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the left turning an airplane caused by P factor is the result of the what? A, B, or C?
A, sir.
A is correct. So it depends on how many questions you decide to take. I'm going to go through this one more time just really quickly so you guys could see how to get there. You go to sporties.com, shop now, training, FAA knowledge test prep. Like I said, go to private, not instrument. You have study test questions, practice FAA test. We're going to do, just for this, we're going to do create new session. You can do study specific categories. You have categories within the categories that you can select. But like I said, we'll just go with a random question. You can select anywhere from 200 to one question. Yeah, we're going to leave that. Lack of sufficient oxygen to the body resulting in impairment is hyperventilation, carbon monoxide poisoning, or hypoxia. You kind of just go through it. You start to learn the answers to the questions, everything. Like I said, this is how I did a lot of it. I also had a ground school book with me, so if I had a question about something, I was able to look in there, or I could text my flight instructor. But like I said, this is how I did it. This is how I took my practice tests, and I scored fairly well on it. So I would recommend doing that, and then doing the free online ground school on Facebook.
Colonel Scott.
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, after you take your first orientation flight, you normally should get an email telling you about the benefits as far
Correct.
as the free sporty. So some of you have not taken an O-Ride yet. So if you have, you should have received that email already telling you either about a free membership to like the Academy of Model Aeronautics, some EAA stuff. You also get the ground school, which is like almost $200. You get quite a bit of stuff.
Right, and let me see. I have it here in my email actually. Here we go. Pull this up for you guys. Here, so you can see this was actually sent to me on August 1st of 2017, so it's an old email. But you can see all these things. Congratulations on your first aircraft orientation flight. We hope you enjoyed the experience and that it piques your interest in aviation. With this achievement comes a complimentary membership in the EAA. When you join, you qualify to become an EAA Young Eagle and will be entitled to benefits called the Young Eagles Flight Plan. So you actually have to join the EAA to get these. Free EAA student membership, free online sports learn to fly course, free first flight lesson, and flight training scholarships. And I believe, actually, the Learn to Fly course, if I can get out of this.
Yeah, they also pay for your written exam. So, like, once you finish ground school, if you go and take your official private pilot test and you pass, you submit that to them, and they'll reimburse you your fee.
Right. It says right here, including FAA written and reimbursement, and the written is not cheap. I will tell you that. I think the Learn to Fly course is something that I wanted. Private pilot Learn to Fly course. Give me 1 second here. Okay. I believe the Learn to Fly course actually gives you can actually test, and it keeps track of your test answers. And yeah, right here, Sporty's Learn to Fly course. And I think it actually keeps track of your answers and sees what you need to work on and recommends things to you. If you want to do that, I would recommend it. You can go for it. Purchase Sporty's Learn to Fly course now. Access to comprehensive video-based training. So if you get an answer wrong, it actually shows you a video on why it's wrong and what the actual right answer is and explains it. Yeah, if you get your first orientation flight and you join Young Eagles, I haven't done it, but I mean, I would. You can go for it. You could get a free Learn to Fly course on Sporty. So, any other questions for me?
Sir,
Yes.
it's not a question. It's more of a comment, I think. But in the second module on page 15, the instrument you were talking about is called the turn coordinator.
Right. So I knew it was called the turn coordinator. There's the piece underneath it, I believe, is called something as well. And that's the I think it was something kind of weird. I can't remember what it was called. Yes, ma'am.
Cadet Lane wants to know what was your hardest challenge when you were learning how to fly?
When I was learning, the hardest challenge was landing. I was trying to study for my written. The hardest challenge for me was weather. The weather theory and how the weather forms and everything. So yeah, learning how to fly, the actual flying, hands-on flying part was landing. I've gotten a lot better at them. They're really smooth now. But the hardest part learning was actually landing without actually wrecking the airplane and crashing it into the ground and killing us all.
Isn't that the most important part, sir?
Definitely not. Definitely not. And also, I do want to say, I had been on all 5 of my orientation flights before I started flight training. and I was comfortable in an airplane. And even my flight instructor was like, dude, you're making my job easy. Like, you've done this before. I was like, well, yeah, I'm in CAP and I've flown airplanes before. And he's like, oh, really, really? So it actually helps if you go on your orientation flights. If you're interested in getting your private pilot's license, do your orientation flights. Do all 5 of them. It'll help you. You'll learn a lot. Read your aerospace books. Do all that stuff. Go through the free online ground school. Do the sporty practice test. That'll help you. That'll put you so far ahead, and it'll save you a lot of money.
What are the 5 orientation flights? I only know of the powered and the glider. I didn't know there were 5.
You get 5 for each airframe. So you get 5 powered, you get 5 glider, and 5 hot air balloon as well.
Ah, very cool. Thank you, sir.
Before you turn 18.
Before you turn 18, yeah, you got to get it all done before you turn 18.
Okay, thank you.
Good, no problem. And Indiana Wing, fun fact, there are 2 hot air balloons in the entire nation, and Indiana Wing has one of those. 2 Civil Air Patrol hot air balloons in the entire nation, and Indiana has one of them. So I've been on 2 hot air balloon orientation flights. I'm sure some other officers in here or high NCOs have been on hot air balloon orientation flight. It's really cool. I think they just started it back up. I think it was down for a little bit, but I think they just started it back up, and we might be trying to get some of those. Any other questions? Okay, so if there's nothing else, then you guys are free to go. There might be homework on this. There might not be. Just keep a lookout in your email. But if you have no other questions, you're free to go. If you have any other questions, you can contact me, or you can stay a little later. You can stay as people are leaving and ask. Doesn't really matter. But if you guys have nothing else, then you're free to go.
All right, sir, I do
Thank
have
you,
a quick
sir.
comment for Oscar Flight. Anyone who's in Oscar Flight, we are having meetings Monday nights at 6:30 p.m. Next Monday night is leadership night. So just so you're aware, be looking at your emails and stuff. We'll remind you again. But that's all I have.
Yep, sounds good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Wow, a lot of people left awfully quick.
I'm just wondering,